The Butterfly's Dream by Curvers 314, Chapter 27, The Odyssey, Part 2. Take me back! Words she'd never entertained before, always sharing time readily, always ready to move forward. Ruby, you're awake? Yes, but for once she wished she wasn't. If those images were the dreams that people had told her about, it was scarce to fathom how they even got out of bed, a place where everything was at your command. What more could they desire? This thought turned into a guilty burden under Yang's relieved face, stained and strained by sleeplessness and a restive consciousness. I'm so glad. The blonde hid that ugly expression in her sister's hair, tight yet careful, not to exaggerate the recently bandaged injuries. I'm back, she whispered sheepishly. You had us really worried, you know. The concern was not projected onto her creamy expression, but within the mere fact that the dark-haired girl was present and without her usual reading material. I'm sorry. Ruby patted her sister reassuringly on the back for lack of anything else, and directed her attention to Blake. I didn't really have a choice, though. What happened? The question was clipped and assertive, betraying nothing out of the ordinary despite the team gathering in the sterilized nurse's ward. The demand was directed elsewhere, though, impatience not with her leader and partner, but with the listless itself and whomever was responsible for it. Nice to see you too, Weiss, the white-haired girl huffed and folded her arms, possibly disguising a nod and blush with the snap of her head over her shoulder. Imaged or not, the prudish girl was there, and that was cause for celebration. Yay, you do care, idiot! I hope you didn't go and do something stupid just to find that out. A delicate hand raised to her forehead, diverted to flick pointedly back to the hospital bed. And that doesn't mean I care. If our leader is incapacitated, it's only prudent that we make sure in case there needs to be a change in command. Blake and Yang sent their other teammate condemning looks, opposed to the beaming grin from the girl in bed, who didn't look like she was letting either that or the cause of her institutionalization get her down. Well, I'm just fine. Thanks for checking, though. Oh, no, you don't. Past mistakes aside, Yang was not going to completely forgo her familial duties and snatched up this opportunity to take care of her baby sister. She was quick as a flash to secure the young Rose back in bed with minimal force for Yang, which meant that the metal struts under the bed almost buckled and the tiles underneath them cracked. You're staying in bed, Missy, at least until the nurses give you permission. Otherwise, but Yang, Ruby pouted, I can't stay cooped up in here. I'm going to get so far behind in class. As your leader, I demand you to carry me back to the dorm. Not going to happen. Come on, pretty please. The boundless energy displayed by Ruby as she blathered on admittedly was a good indication that the purple-bobbed nurse wasn't going to have much excuse to keep the girl bedridden for long. Blake herself seemed to become increasingly perturbed with the noise by the minute, and it was a foregone conclusion that no one in their right mind would hold up long under such a constant banter. In fact, Ruby was carrying on like nothing had happened, like she hadn't dragged a half-dead Roman Torchwick and Neapolitan into a crowded diner on her bare and bleeding feet. What was more, her sister was going along with the act, if it was an act at all, and not the first signs of depravity infecting the lot. Oh well, if you can't beat them. Homework shouldn't be an issue. Blake offhandedly slipped into the conversation, sitting down on the other chair adjacent to the bed. You're already caught up on most of everything, and we can copy what notes you miss. Right, Weiss? It was an olive branch, but the obstinate girl looked at it like it was barbed wire, threatening to ensnare her. Ruby, what happened? She all but demanded, a different kind of insanity, repetition of an action and expecting a different outcome. Yes, I too would be curious to know. The difference here was that another person had entered the room and changed the equation. Headmaster, you gave us all quite a scare, Miss Rose. Osmond Alpert ignored the skittish Weiss, who gave him a wide berth as he entered the room. You seem to be faring better, though. I'm glad. As always, it was hard to tell if he meant it, but I suspect he didn't even know. If you are feeling up to it, it would be good to understand how two criminals we thought were locked up in the jailhouse managed to not only break free, but break into such a secure place as Beacon. Usually it was hard to tell what Osmond meant with his speech, words seemingly smokescreen to what was really going on underneath. Ruby had come to be able to read these, though, and knew he was not in the least bit curious. He already knew. She wanted to know why. Sure. Her smile was a degree past what would be considered happy, bordering on mad. She wanted to know why, too. So, it was during the food fight, huh? Discomforting aside, the three young women sat like raptured children on bated breath and the cold infirmary floor. The headmaster was given preferential treatment to the story time, though was and he was perched on the edge of his seat. All the same, he was enjoying the reenactment almost as much as the girl conducting it, despite the bandages constraining her movement. Isn't that what I said? Out of breath by the end, Ruby collapsed dizzily back into the tangle of sheets. I think so, though none looked too confident when the question was passed around the room. We thought you were upset with us or something, Blake confessed, changing the topic, and that you just wanted to be alone for a while, like last time. I'm really sorry. No, like Robin, she leered out for her nest at the startled feline. No, don't feel bad. I can't believe that I made you guys think I was upset with you. I can't treat that like something normal. I won't do it anymore, and I won't leave you guys alone ever again. I'm the one who should be sorry. As your leader, I need to go. I need to be responsible and available 24/7. It really wasn't up to you this time. The secret fauness tried to protest under the overbearing petulance of her leader. The whole thing is crazy, Why snipped, shaking her head, but with a hint of satisfaction with her conclusion. Fascinating it might have been, but that smile was one which said Osmond was keeping the best part to himself. I think that's enough for now, though. Best to let Miss Rose get some rest, and you three have classes early tomorrow, correct? He chuckled at the collective groan, taking special pleasure as the one expect made joyous faces with no mind to her boo-boos. Ruby minus the R waved goodbye and departed like it was a normal occasion. Perhaps it would be, and was getting to that destination quickly. Life must change and adapt to survive after all. Good night, you guys. Headmaster. To them, tired as they were, the address was bidding farewell. To Osmond, he heard the pause, and stopped at the doorway, letting the footsteps ahead of him diminish to nothing. Then he carefully made sure the double-hinged doors were as shut as the time he did all this, and turned around though. Ruby was already but a silken cocoon on the mattress. Unbothered, Osmond sighed contemplatively and smiled. As he made to leave, switching off the lights with the same carelessness as he manipulated the security footage, he heard a whisper. It's so strange. I just wondered how Roman managed to sneak in here anyway. Her eyes were almost glowing with her wrappings, an unnerving sight, I imagine. It's a shame we weren't on our usual patrols the night they got out. We were all tired though, so it's weird that someone would start a food fight then of all days. I suppose that it would have hidden any evidence of tampering though. His lack of emotional response was an affront to my sense of caution, hypocritical this may be, as I admired the Rikodu Sennin for just such this infallible attitude. Regardless, I had learned from my host to trust a gut feeling. Ah, well, maybe some things are better left a mystery. Good night, Miss Rose. It's not always good to resolve every little thing, upturn every stone. Sometimes it's just better to admire the garden path. Poisonous things often lurk in the darkness, though if you just focus on the creepy crawlies or even the shady trail, you risk of missing the roses. I'm back. His smile was wary as the legs, which barely held him upright. Content enough to be carried on the journey back, he insisted on walking into the village on his own 2 feet. Thinking on it, what Uriah had done bordered on treason, subversion at the minimum, taking the village's jinjuriki outside without permission. Yet his master had done so for him because he could see just how much the attempt meant to the young man, his life, his career, to assuage his people's yearnings. It would have been so much easier if he'd been simply work be a simple workaholic or pervert. There was no denying his own culpability, no matter how much Jura dissuaded it. He was prepared to be berated, beaten, punished for his foolhardy obsession, not expecting sympathy or leniency, and least of all forgiveness for his harsh actions. Judging by the downright irate look on his brunette teammate's face, he didn't have to worry about the latter. Still, as par for the course with this story, he didn't expect what happened next. Slap! It was a far cry from the teeth-rattling strikes he knew she could deliver, and yet it almost knocked him off his unsteady feet. And yet it was more painful than anything done to him yet. You left us! Her words were so inflamed they chilled him to the bone, her eyes so cold that they burned. I'm sorry. What else could he say? It was it was certainly of no help. Silence was easy, just pretending you weren't there. The sweetest lie to believe. It hurt less, at least at first. We're your friends. Why didn't you come to us for help? I. Naruto had two settings, full volume and silent, and boy did Tenten know how to push his buttons. She shook her head dejectedly. You've always kept so much from us. You pretend that you're everything on the outside, loud, brave, carefree, and open like a book, but you continue to live alone in your mind, wrapping yourself in whatever fantasies are comfortable. Naruto wanted to speak up, or maybe it was Ruby herself putting words into his mouth to deny that is the mission. We're real too, Naruto. Tears which had not noticed behind that frozen gaze, leapt out at him. We're real, she's real, and she's here now too. A hand cast behind her, as if to unveil the face he only knew from sidelong glances and dreams. Bare Ruby, whatever she was scared. What makes us less important? What do we need to do to make you trust us? What did they need to do to make them real in his eyes? People he hadn't even met were his reality because he didn't have to imagine their flaws, only the perfect idea of them. Tenten, siblings shared things, teammates shared things. Life taught us to not be miserable without possessions and generous with our understanding. In that respect, had he ever truly been worthy of being called either? Ruby, friends trusted one another. His vigilance was a betrayal of that. Suspicion and doubt his motivation. Ruby, the original, acknowledged the other's legitimacy, so why couldn't he? Was he truly that afraid of finding what he had sought for so long? You guys, that had started as a handful of seeds, had taken root, intertwined and grown without his cultivation. Even in the darkness they had bloomed in the face of neglect. Such was the way of life, real life which existed regardless of his observation, organisms and situations that were intertwined regardless of distances and without the use of words, seeking each other blind leading the blind. There was no rational which justified why they should act like this. The condition of man was a perpetual and selfish desire of happiness, and they should not begrudge him for reaching for it when he had the chance. Likewise, there would be no surprise when they left him, walked away when he was unable to protect them like he promised. No, there was no logic to these words unless to spite. That was the way I used to think. It is a lonely way to live, if that can even be called life. I don't deserve you, he replied at last, as much to earth underneath him as the small crowd of jaded faces gathered round. I don't deserve Ruby either. I don't even deserve the fox nor the fourth trusting me with him. Perhaps if I had been a true friend, I would have banished this thought. If anything was unbalanced, it was the other way around. I would never say it, but those two are one of the most magnificent things to ever happen to me, and the thing is, I never needed to. You're probably right about that. Sasuke spoke for the first time since returning from his fragile chase. But we're what you got, and you're stuck with us. Tearing himself away from the pungent dirt, he looked up to see those faces, tender smiles carved from alabaster shining down on him with all the radiances of the light of day. So come on, an arm hooked underneath his shoulder, lifting him up. Stop trying to lower yourself. It's our job to catch up. Just give us a breather every now and then, hmm? The wooden face of his former sensei cracked a smile. Was this a dream? Yeah, any more surprises and you might just give us heart attacks. Brazen in the face of irony, the most laid back of their rookie group lit a cigarette. Nah, I want to see what you came up with next. Sliding into his other arm, The torment of fire and ice on her face had homogenized into a soft glow, and we all want to be there to see it, so don't try to leave us behind next time, all right? Yosh, if I cannot keep pace with your youthfulness, I will have to do all the missions in the roster on my hands in one day. We will stand with you through thick and thin, but I won't do that. Settling into the growing mob, Neji regarded the green spandex wearing teen with what I can only imagine was absent of relief that he was not sidelined with someone like that. With all due respect, hmm, it's only fair if we do it all. Can't have fun without a little bit of work, I suppose. You guys do all that for me? The question earned him another smack on the head, though this one had even less force. After all this, do you really need to ask? We're friends and we stick together. We've got your back because we know you've got ours. Perhaps Tenten did know of the clones he had loitering about. Meh, or the next person who gives us such entertainment. They did what? The verbal earthquake knocked several tiles off the roofs and startled several birds, which took flight to some other roost less chaotic. Did this count as entertainment, guys? Guys, they had meant what they said, but this was the challenge he had to face himself. Well, himself and the perverted Sanin who was hogtied and gift wrapped by his feet. Who could ask for more? Normalcy. Things hadn't gotten quite that bad yet, but within days of the episode, Beacon had fallen into a tenuous peace, a working compromise which allowed the background students to mostly ignore the ever growing sect of weirdness. As always, things were constantly changing. Ruby had already been discharged from the infirmary within the day of her admittance. Apparently, even the childishly energetic nurse couldn't handle much of the girl's stir crazy fidgeting and signed off on a clean bill of health, despite the patchwork of bandages still covering her pale skin. Unburdened by this, Ruby was humming a rhythmless tune as she made her way through the lunchroom, ignoring and all too happy to be ignored by the inconsequential flock who made no show of avoiding her, not that they dared stand in her path as she practically skipped down the aisles, unconsciously compressing themselves to the side in anticipation. Despite this becoming almost instinct by now, a few seemingly hadn't received the memo. So, Johnny boy, tell me, how's the sloppy Joe today? More sloppy or more Joe? The muted snickers were enough to override her internal melody. The human wall between her and the tables, typical occupied by Ruby and Juniper, sufficient to make her pause in her stride. Could you move, please? The silence from the rest of the lunchroom should have been enough for Cardinal to recognize the situation they were in, but it wasn't until they turned around, expressions of contrite not yet being stowed, did they realize perhaps they should have practiced more spatial awareness. Can't you see where? Oh shit, I mean, there was nothing particularly menacing about the curious expression on Ruby's face. Head cocked slightly to the side in a more or less genuine show of expectancy. Come to think of it, that in itself was so most unnerving, a total disregard for whatever tension existed before her arrival, the power to override a script merely by existing in it. Sure, then again, they were just filler anyway, lines and bodies shuffling aside to give her space. Cardinal made themselves scarce, torn between being incensed and grateful at the wordless pardon they were given. Ruby totally ignored them once they no longer stood between her spot, a medium between the two teams of first years. It was simply where she always fit, a bridge between the two, between mundanity and excitement, fantasy and reality, truth and something more. The obliviousness wasn't as feigned as perhaps it seemed to outside spectators, for it took Ruby a while to notice after she sat down that she was one of the few from either team to do so. Huh, where is everyone? Against his will, John flinched at her question as he stared at his abused lunch, which had been smeared all over the tray before Ruby's timely arrival. Don't know, finally relenting, seeing as he was the only one available. I know Ren is helping Nora with some of her assignments, which are due next period. Pyra is still stuck in the food line, maybe with the rest of your team. Huh? That would certainly explain why Cardin and his cronies hadn't immediately gotten their asses handed to them. But Where would the rest of her team be? Oh wait, Yang had confessed that the three of them had actually been falling behind on a paper which was due soon because they had been caught up in their extracurriculars, extracurriculars, and helped their invalid captain. She felt kind of guilty for being partly responsible. On the other hand, the elation from being exempt from said paper because of her injuries practically smothered that. I see. She nodded seriously to herself before digging into her teriyaki salmon and orange salad, unobservant of the melancholic microlimit hangings just next to her. So, how's it going with you, John? Despite the occasional team exercises and classes they shared, Juniper's other activities hadn't been much discussed. In all fairness, she and her team had been quite occupied as of late, only now seeing the promise of relief in the distance. Considering this, she couldn't really fathom the nonplussed look being given in response. What's the matter? Do I have something on my face? The blond haired young man shook his head in exasperation, perhaps wondering not for the first time if Ruby was really that socially oblivious, or if she acted that way to make light of a difficult discussion. What would he say if he knew she often wondered the same thing? Nothing. Turning back to his mush and half-heartedly trying to spoon the scattered meat into a semblance of the sandwich it once represented. Do you want me to leave? He dropped the utensil, wiping his head to her in aghast. No, I mean, there's no reason for you to. You might as well. There aren't that many other open spaces. Now she looked at him like he was mad, for the cafeteria was at most half populated, and there was little doubt that Ruby could possibly clear the remaining half just by asking politely. Okay. John turned his head away in embarrassment with the pink dusting contrasting the straw blonde, chagrined twofold at being looked at as, as, askance by the crazy girl. Not that he invested in that rumor. So, what's really the matter? A rare moment of seriousness which was not at the end of her imposing weapon. You're still comfortable with me being around you? No, he automatically denied. Well, kind of, but that's not really the issue. Sighing under her expectant and unnerving intense stare, he resigned himself that he wasn't leaving the table without a full confession. It's just you're so strong and I'm not. Yeah. While he deflected under the blunt weight, Ruby again shrugged off the oppressive attitude. Well, you don't really have anyone there to blame but yourself, sneaking a bite of her fish in between a twist set of lips. I know, really, this was by far the most expectant thing which had happened in days. Did he truly expect a useful answer? Why don't you try training more? I'm sure Pyra would be happy to help, and she wasn't just saying that because she noticed the intense stares the redhead gave her blonde captain. Pyra was really just that nice of a person. You're just as strong as she is, though. The spoon in his hand strained under his meager grip, and Cardin is scared of you, but you don't even care. Exactly. Her tone obsolete, he once again stared at her as she finished half her lunch, trying to somehow fathom what was going on behind the scene in her head. I don't care, so why should you? No matter how long he stared at her as she unabashedly polished off her meal, he would not be able to unravel the mystery just by watching. Can you teach me to be strong? Nope. The reply came too quick and so bluntly it was like a slap, and John all but collapsed in a heap on the table. I'm still learning myself. You're welcome to learn with me, though. With the same unperturbed smile on her face, Ruby extended a metaphorical hand to the flailing blonde, who still reminded her of Naruto. I really don't understand you, you know that. He sighed, but this time with his own billboard smile on his face. Then again, I really don't understand women in general, despite living with 8 of them for my entire life. A light bulb seemed to flick on in his face, revisiting the petite girl as something else, and the mystical creature, maybe seeing her as a human female for the first time. Say, Ruby, do you think you could teach me about girls too? In theory, it made sense. She had presented herself to be many things, but a girlish figure was not one of them. In a twisted sense that made her more approachable. Plus, her admitted uncaring made the question safe enough, right? Unproportionally, un, Uproarious laughter filled the cafeteria, several heads turning their way until they saw who the culprit was and quickly averted their gazes. This did nothing to help John, who was mortified by all the attention being diverted their way. Eventually, his pitiful groan penetrated through the diminished giggles, and Ruby whipped a tear away from her eye. Sorry, inside joke. It would have been even funnier if he could only know how literal that was, but I'm willing to do what I can. Giving credit where it is due, John recovered from his defeat rather quickly, picking up his pieces and looking up, down at the strange femalish warrior next to him, who was giving a rather haughty but empathetic thumbs up, beaming like an idiot. Really, she was not much different than he. Their awkwardness was comparable. If anything, he was the one more adjacent to the standard, but that didn't matter to Ruby, and that's what made her such an enigma, a mystery for some people to uncover, and an iconic for others to aspire to. Thanks, Ruby. No problem. Now come on. Stealing the spoon from him, she jerked up a heaping serving of the mystery meat and shoved it into his mouth, massaging his cheeks to masticate the already ground meal. Hurry up and eat. You're going to need the strength to get through all the exercises. Her. I believe he was asking if they were going to immediately rush into the promised training. Of course, there's no time to waste. We only have like a half an hour left of lunch before ports class. You can rest in there before we go again. Being spoon fed like a baby was the least of John's concerns as he listened to what was in store for him. There was clearly a moment where he contemplated just what his unplanned request had precipitated. But then he let go of that fear, let the apathy wash over him like the ocean and sink into the sea of tranquility. An infant, an infant in the arms of the world. Thus he learned his lesson. Really, in the vastness of things, in the galaxy of stars overhead, spawning infinite possibilities, crossed by the endlessness of time, was there any world which was perfect, with any combination of sunlight and chemicals result in something better than this? Or was the initial state of their lives as good as things were ever going to get? And really, who could ask for more from where they stood in that moment? What was not possible? End of chapter 27.